Hello, everyone. I'm Nathan Shapura, Senior Political Advisor at the European People's Party. On behalf of the EPP, welcome to this edition of EPP Family Talks. Today, we have the pleasure to welcome with us Minister Ine Eriksen Søreide, Foreign Minister for Norway, from our member party, Høyre, or the Conservative Party. Minister, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Family talks are always nice, so I was very happy to participate.
Well, we're very glad to have you. And the first question we normally ask of all of our guests in this series during this terrible time of pandemic is first, how are you doing? What are things like on the ground where you are in Norway? Tell us what's the situation there?
Well, I think we have the pandemic, relatively speaking, under control. We have low numbers of infected people. We have low numbers of people in hospital, and we have taken quite strict measures to kind of stem the spread of the virus. But we have seen after Christmas a certain, I would say, increase, especially related to mutations of the virus, which I think is now the common game in all countries. So we are in a situation where we are very cautious and opening up very, very slowly and prioritizing children and young people. We have started our vaccinations and, of course, been very happy to see how the European cooperation on purchasing vaccines have been working out for us as well. And we've been very, very closely attached to the European Union and to the European cooperation in this regard. So we are cautious, but we are hoping that things over time will normalize more. Personally, I think the thing I miss the most is to hug people because I'm a hugger. So I look forward to the day when I can start hugging people again.
I think that's a lot of people could relate to that exact sentiment. As foreign minister, you're very involved not only in efforts within Norway or in the region, but globally as well. I know just a few days ago at the United Nations Security Council, you made a statement on the global pandemic, laying out the priorities of equitable access to vaccines, humanitarian access for those most vulnerable, and cessation of hostilities in conflict areas so people can get vaccinated. You highlighted the fact that, it's now more than 2 million people globally from this terrible pandemic, and of course, billions affected. How do you see these priorities that you laid out going forward? What are the steps needed to make these priorities become a reality?
Well, I think first and foremost, the world needs to come together to work on an equitable and fair sharing of vaccines among all countries, because what this pandemic really has shown us is that no one is safe until everyone is safe. So it doesn't help vaccinating your own population if your neighbors are not vaccinated, or if you start opening up too early and there are no vaccinations or healthcare in place. So I think that from our side, the most important thing that we have done is to invest quite heavily in vaccines, both development and distributions, through COVAX and also having a split chairmanship of the Act A together with South Africa to generate not only funding, but also development and distributions of vaccines and medical equipment. And I'm quite happy to say, actually, that today is the first distribution of COVAX vaccines. The first flight landed in Accra in Ghana this morning, and they will start vaccinations early next week. I think tomorrow or Friday, a plane will land in Ivory Coast, and they will also start their vaccinations. So we've done a lot of investment together with other countries, and we think that that's the best way to move forward. But I have to say also that I'm very worried about the trends that we see on especially the humanitarian access, and also the fact that health workers are now very exposed to attacks and the lack of access. And that is also why we've been focusing on this in the Security Council and being very supportive of the UK's resolution that will hopefully be adopted by the end of the week, that focuses on exactly these points. And I think that we are in a situation now where we have to address these issues. Otherwise, we will not be able to reach the most vulnerable populations in many countries of the world prone to conflict, and where access and also the distribution of vaccines is really lacking.
I want to pick up on that note about COVAX that you were just mentioning. in the context of the United Nations, also in partnership with the United Kingdom. Of course, the European Union has been leading in this effort. Now the United States has recently said they're going to join also the COVAX initiative. So on the note of geopolitical cooperation, in particular transatlantic cooperation now with the new US president, the new US Congress, how do you see the transatlantic relationship now going forward? What are the main priorities, do you think, for how to strengthen it on both sides of the water?
Well, I think that Secretary of State Blinken said it well to the EU foreign ministers a couple of days ago, that he was focusing a lot on how trust in transatlantic relations needs to kind of get a new boost. And I think what he said was very welcome among my good European colleagues. As I see it, we have so many common interests and so many shared values that it is absolutely paramount to cooperate. And I think that's also in the DNA of both the US and Europe. So what I see where the opportunities arise now is especially when it comes to global health, and the fact that the Biden administration has been really clear from the beginning on re-engaging in global vaccine work, not leaving the WHO, starting to pay off all their contingents for the WHO, very good. The re-engagement in the Paris Agreement, extremely important. And also the fact that the Biden administration has been talking a lot about, from the beginning, that they want to assume a leadership again on democracy and human rights. I think that's music to many European countries' ears, because this is where we need the US to assume leadership, and they will have a lot of support and good countries to work with in this regard. So I'm looking forward to seeing how they are carving out the path forward on these issues. But there are many opportunities, really.
You've laid out a lot of very interesting things I want to follow up on. Maybe I could just first touch on the issue of climate and the Paris Agreement. Of course, there's the European Green Deal, which we're supporting as well. And I think Norway, maybe more than many countries, feels very keenly the effects of climate change, being in an area bordering the Arctic, where the effects are sometimes dramatic, sometimes quite disruptive, bringing with them new challenges, maybe also some new opportunities. How should EU members, how should NATO members be thinking about the Arctic, let's say, in particular, as in the context of climate change?
Well, you're absolutely right about the Arctic and how fast climate change takes place. It's almost double as fast as elsewhere in the world. So we can actually, especially in the north of Norway and on Svalbard, we will very, very quickly see how the climate is changing and not for the better. So that is also why we've taken a very tight grip on our engagement with the European Union when it comes to the European Green Deal. We see it as both a very good path forward to realizing the Paris Agreement, but we also see it as a growth strategy for Europe now. So we have been, I would say, very forward-leaning on this, and I, as foreign minister, have the responsibility in the government of coordinating our efforts on this. It touches every ministry, but we are having four ministers. We are having a meeting with Timmermans and other commissioners on Monday, talking about how Norway can contribute with knowledge, expertise, technology, innovations, and just to make the green shift possible. I mean, we have a very, very long-standing experience with different kind of energy solutions that are renewable. We have technology within the climate and environment sector that is very interesting. And we see also now a great interest from the European Union side on carbon capture and storage. So these are all topics that we will talk about with Timmermans and the other commissioners. We're looking so much forward to this, because we are very, very closely linked to the EU climate and environment policy. We do that because we think the EU is really an engine in this and a catalyst in actually making the green transition. And that is also why we think that we can contribute to this on a European perspective. So we are looking forward to that.
One of the things I find so interesting is that the issue of climate change in the United States and Europe and in many places is not only about economics, it's not only about humanitarian issues and development, it's also a security issue. It poses lots of new security risks, new security threats. And so that maybe leads me to transition to a new topic where Norway is very, very important, and that is in the context of NATO, where Norway was a founding member, one of 12 founding members back in 1949. Just a few months ago, in November 2020, the NATO Reflection Group published a series of priorities for the next decade. This was a group appointed by your compatriot, Secretary General Stoltenberg. And one of the key planks of that agenda 2030 is greater NATO-EU cooperation. So how do you see, when you look at NATO's path forward in the next 10 years or so, how do you see greater EU-NATO cooperation going forward, but also other priorities listed in that report? How can NATO, improve its work, be better equipped to fulfill its mandates?
Well, first and foremost, I think that the process that has been going on in NATO since 2014 has been extremely important. Norway has been in the front line of the military buildup and modernization of NATO, meaning we have to spend more on defense. We have to be sure that the capacities that we have in each country is also able to deliver on joint defense of the alliance if it's needed, to work together, to exercise together, and do all of these things that are so important. And now the time has come to also modernize the political pillar of NATO, because we're not stronger militarily than we are in political cohesion. So I've really been welcoming the reflection group, and they have a lot of very interesting recommendations. And I'd like to also give credit to not only Jens Stoltenberg, but also to Federica Mogherini in her time, and now Josep Borrell, on the fact that they are both the NATO Secretary General and the High Representative of the EU have really been keen to find a good division of labor between NATO and the EU, meaning that now when we take part in each other's discussions, the High Representative is always at the working dinners for foreign ministers and defense ministers in NATO. I think we've found a good balance, because no one is interested in building parallel structures where you have the NATO structure on the one hand, the EU structure on the other hand, because no European country will ever be able to have enough resources to do double tracks in a way. So that's why the division of labor has been so important to work on. And I think all of them has done that in a very, very good way. So I'm actually quite hopeful for the future of the collaboration. And I also think there's a lot of trust between the two organizations now that is really a much better starting point than where we were in the mid-2000s, for instance.
I think the political cooperation and engagement and the division of labor all are things which dovetail with something you referenced earlier, which is the idea of a global summit of democracies, which President Biden has put on the table, and which we in the EPP and leaders in Europe have been supporting for the last few weeks now. And so I think there's definitely a very strong agenda there for potential further cooperation, further strengthening of the transatlantic partnership in general, including the NATO plank, which is foundational to that. Maybe I want to just ask you about one more policy area before finishing this interview with a more informal question, and that is relating to the Middle East. This is something that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Norway has been focused on quite a lot. For example, praising Jordan for its vaccination efforts, including the vaccines, condemning the recent rocket attacks in Iraq, calling for relief and for an end of hostilities in Yemen, and of course playing a key role, for many years now, playing a key role in the Middle East peace process. The new UN Special Envoy for the Middle East peace process is a fellow Norwegian, Tor Vennesland, I can say his name correctly. So when you look at the Middle East now, what are you most optimistic about, and what are you most concerned by?
Well, I can make reference actually to a meeting I chaired together with Josep Borrell yesterday in the Ad Hoc Liaison Committee, the donor group for Palestine. And I have to say that there was a marked difference now compared to our last meeting in June, where we now have seen a resumption of the cooperation between Israel and Palestine on many very important issues like health and security. We have seen a very changed dynamic in the region, especially regarding the normalization agreements between Israel and several Arab states. We've seen a new Biden administration who have explicitly stated that they are going to re-engage with the Palestinians, both economically and politically. And I think that overall, even though there is a very, very challenging dynamic in the region, and it has been for decades, and none of these issues that pertain to the outstanding final status issues will be solved unless the parties start negotiating again, which is, I think, the ultimate goal for all of us. Even though all of those challenges are still there, I would have to say that I'm more, as I said yesterday, I'm cautiously optimistic, and I underline cautiously, because we are entering into a phase where things can also easily change. We are having Israeli elections again now in the end of March. We have 3 consecutive Palestinian elections in the spring and summer. And of course, whenever there is an election campaign, an election coming up, the political fronts have a tendency to tighten and harden. But I must say that the fact that the Biden administration also is re-engaging with the Palestinians is a positive step. Tony Blinken has also praised the normalization agreements, and I think that was work that was well done also by the previous American administration. But the agreements themselves does not solve the final issues, and it doesn't solve a peace agreement between Israelis and Palestinians. So we still have a very, very long way to go. But I do sense that the climate is slightly different and slightly better now than it was just some months ago. So I'm cautiously optimistic and hopeful.
Just a point of clarification for any of our viewers who might not have picked up on this. When you're talking about normalization relations, these are the Abraham Accords, correct?
That's right.
The peace agreements in the last few months between Israel and Bahrain, Israel and the UAE, Israel and Sudan, for example. Well, I know these are areas where our own Secretary General and many in the EPP family have been very supportive and involved as well. So some things to be optimistic about, cautiously optimistic about for the coming months, as you mentioned. Well, thanks so much for your insight on these issues. I wanted to ask you one final, more personal question, and we tried to close these Family Talks interviews with this, or a very simple question to all of our guests, and that is to help our viewers and our political family get to know you better. Is there a book or a series or a film you could recommend to us?
I just have to start by saying I wish I could see more series, more films, read more books than I ever have time for. But if I was to come with a couple of recommendations on the series, I would recommend a series called Afterlife with Ricky Gervais. You may have seen it. It's a 2-season series, quite short episodes about a man who lost, unfortunately, his wife to cancer. But there is also so much warmth and humor in that series that I have to recommend it. I really liked it. It's very funny, actually, but also, of course, very sad. On the film side, I think I will recommend a film that is, it's some years old now. It's more or less 10 years old, I think. The Untouchables, which is also an extremely good film that has that combination of being a drama, being a sad film, but also an enormous amount of humor and that human touch that is wonderful. So those two may be the recommendations for me this time.
If I'm not mistaken, The Untouchables stars Sean Connery and Kevin Costner. It's a movie from the 80s. I think Sean Connery won an Academy Award. I know there's a funny story Denzel Washington tells about being up also for an award that year, and when he realized that Sean Connery basically was up for the same thing, he even left the Academy Awards early because he realized he was not going to win it. I just warmth and humor are two things you mentioned there as well. Going back to what you said at the beginning of the interview about being someone who misses hugs, I think these are all things, warmth, humor, these are things all of us miss, and all of us can, look forward to and take advantage of every opportunity we can get. And these, as winter ends and spring does finally arrive, and the pandemic hopefully has some kind of a light at the end of the tunnel now to it. So thanks for those. We catalog all of these recommendations. We appreciate that also very much. Miss Ine Eriksen Søreide, Minister of Foreign Affairs for Norway, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. Thanks for the good and important work you're doing on behalf of the EPP. Thank you so much. Join us to all our viewers. Thanks for joining us, and tune in again next time. We hope to see you then. Have a nice afternoon.